You will own nothing and you will be miserable. I think we are on a crossroads of civilization at this point, and it's important to talk because spirituality and freedom are very interconnected. There was a now famous saying from the World Economic Forum that by 3030 you will own nothing and you will be happy. The idea is basically that every asset will be rented and that we will have some form of universal income and will be renting everything. Now, there is a huge shortcoming to this idea. And I think the way it goes is as you see right here in the 1920s Metropolis movie. The idea came 100 years ago, it was just almost 100 years ago. And what you are seeing are the people in the undercity going to their shift and working miserably, wasting their lives. And the idea of this particular sci-fi is that you have this undercity of this labor workers, and then you have the upper city of the prestige class. Now, from today's perspective, this movie was still quite optimistic because it had the main character sort of in a Siddhartha form of someone who then will be compassionate with the people from the lower floors. I don't think that looking at today's society development and prestigious billionaires class, that this level of empathy we can even expect. So let's get into the forest and let's get talking. Like recording, so let's go. Beautiful sunny morning again in the forest here. So now some of you may think, well, how is this related to the agnostic channel? It goes into politics. I would disagree. Let me explain. So number one is spirituality inherently requires freedom, and we saw spirituality mostly thriving in times of stability. Now that's a difference, a significant difference between organized religion and spirituality itself. Religion can thrive in really terrible times, and it has. And you know, it's not like exclusive, because we had some of the great sages of humanity during really the dark ages themselves. It is not exclusive. But what it is that for religion, if the times are bad, well, it still will thrive, because what religion actually asks is obedience. And you can be obedient, you can live in a miserable world, hoping that after you die the world will go better. You just need to attend some rituals and practices prescribed by the religion, and from that perspective you will be fine. Now, spirituality requires a little bit more. Spirituality is not just the act of faith, it's really a transformation of a person itself. And the transformatory power that is needed requires certain ability to develop within space and time. So it's an effort that you put into spirituality itself. And for this effort to be able to happen, you just need space in your mind, you need space around you. That's why some of the sages take seclusion, retreats. That's why monasteries are built, not just to sort of in isolation preserve, but as well to develop. And with the world direction now, and this is just probabilities, right? It can go either way, but the indications now are going into a very problematic way. What I mean by that is that the world itself is going into an unprecedented realm of difference between poor and rich. I mean, we had these differences during the feudalism. But what comes at the same time, hand in hand, is the ability to mass control, mass survey, and basically mass indoctrinate people. And that's something that we historically never had at this level. This is completely new. And it's dangerous from a perspective of the spiritual people. Because on one hand, the more miserable you will be, the more focused you will be on just your physical needs. Maslow's pyramid, right? I mean, shelter, food, just your primordial desires, just to take care of them will be more and more exhausting than the rest. And in this field, to still be able to hold the torch of spirituality will be incredibly challenging. Now, some may say, well, but we will develop artificial intelligence and we will develop robotics, and that means that these technologies will cover more and more workforce and we should be then free to do more what we want. And I mean, this idea wasn't so far-fetched even a decade ago. Then a decade ago, I saw the sort of industry turning into the idea that actually we could work less. A lot of colleagues I know, even my former boss at that time, was working only 4 days a week, and it was seen as preferable. And then the discussions were, so what if we make like just 6 hours work days, and what if it will be just 4 days a week? And there was really a certain moment in time where this was quite a trendy idea. Unfortunately, the development in the recent years has completely shifted it. Now, let's be very clear. I personally think that with all the automation and robotization, we really will be able to outsource human labor more and more. And no one at this point knows where are the limits. But definitely it will only increase in taking over the workforce. Unfortunately, at the same time, what we see is, what the worst paying job in the world really is at this point? Training AI. Now, some may say, oh, no, AI companies, they pay well, they make a lot of revenue. Well, there is a company in Silicon Valley that sells AI trainings. What it means is that it has a global access to workforce. People just sign in and they train AIs for basically something like $1 an hour. And now imagine what type of the work it is, and you will understand why I started with the scene of Metropolis. So these people log into a portal, and for hours and hours they will take a look at pictures, say milk bottles. Now imagine you have a screen where you have 8 milk bottles, and you need to differentiate which is almond. So you go in, you make a circle around the almond milks, and so on and so on and so on. And you need to do this really fast, really many times a minute. And once you do this for hours, you maybe get $1 an hour. This is where we are today. This is how the future may look like for everybody, because since the robotics takes over, what incentives is there for the companies to actually pay you a decent wage? The idea, like even the decade or 15 years ago, was we will work less, but we will sort of keep our salaries. The salaries will still be decent. But nowadays, it seems like the economists are thinking, why would we actually pay the people? Let's reduce the workload, let's pay them less. And what this creates seems paradoxical, that the automation, instead of making human labor scarce and more expensive, it will make it abundant and it will be cheap. So this is one of the possible futures that seems to be the most probable at this moment in time, and that's why I'm making this video, because it's rising in probability by every day. Let me give you a little bit of a mathematical exercise, if you don't mind, to explain how wealth distribution is completely broken. Imagine you inherit from your father 1,000 flats or 1,000 houses that you can rent out. Okay, you rent 1,000 houses. Say each of the houses will be rented for $2,000. Okay, that means you make $2 million a month. That's gross profit. And I will say you live a lavish lifestyle, right? You have one of these houses for you. You have a car. You spend on yourself. You take a private jet here and there. Say you spend like $200,000 just on yourself, like living really lavishly. A month. You have 180,000 that you haven't spent. That's something about more than 2 million a year. So with your 1,000 houses in first year, you have more than 1,000 houses in the second year. And then it gets exponentially growing in 10 years and in 20 years, right? So you will have more money than you can actually spend. And for the rest of the money that you cannot spend, you will invest them, you will buy either whatever. This increases the prices of the necessary things for living, like housing. And you can afford it because you have 1,000 houses, so even if everything doubles, first of your asset value doubles anyway. So if you want to go buy a loan, you can go buy a loan, but if you want to play it safe, if the inputs are more expensive, you just raise the rents. And people will have to pay it because they will have to live. So this is how you can never compete with inborn wealth or acquire wealth at this scale of level. And say 1,000 houses is not even a huge scale. Billionaires absolutely can have hundreds of thousands of flats and houses. It's nothing that doesn't exist. I mean, I think to my knowledge, for example, in Germany, you have families that own in this huge scale real estate. So, and it wasn't a problem so far, as long as the wages for the people have been really decent. The society was taken care of a lot. But now we see that the gap is breaking further. So let me give you an example. One of the richest countries in Europe per capita, with the best GDP per capita, is Ireland. Some people say Monaco, but let's take Ireland as an example. So Ireland is on paper really rich, a huge profit for the states. But the Irish people, they are struggling. The rents and flats in Dublin are unpayable. You have people that have jobs, decent jobs, and they are living with their parents in their 40s. I mean, office people jobs, right? That was like unthinkable, like 20 years ago. And this is the huge danger. Now, obviously, I'm not a political commentator nor an economic commentator, but it's important to understand that from the perspective of spirituality, and I really believe that the expansion of consciousness through education, through training, is a necessary step for humanity to evolve and better understand the cosmos, and even then go beyond our Earth allocation, right? Like interplanetary systems. I really believe that what we need to do is improve our society, improve the life of the individuals, and the assets are there. they are there. There is a wonderful sentence by one of the richest guys whom I really respect for this. So Berkshire Hathaway had a shareholder meeting after they sold a lot of shares from Apple. And they sold the shares, And now there was a question about cash, because you generate a lot of cash, and taxes. And he said, yeah, well, I sold the shares and I paid my taxes, and I'm proud paying taxes, because while I pay taxes, I get the protection that we need in the share market. Rules cost money. I'm paraphrasing, that's not literally the same. But here comes the really important point. And he said, and if there would be 800 more companies like Berkshire Hathaway paying the same amount of taxes that we are paying, no one in America would need to pay any tax. Income tax, real estate tax, health and social security. Now let this sink in, okay? There is this basically idol of capitalism standing there in a company he built and saying, yeah, well, I mean, I pay taxes, yes, and I see it as a responsibility toward the state, because the state creates the environment where I can do my business. And if 800 more of us would do the same, we would be an utopia and we wouldn't need to pay any taxes. I mean, the assets are there, right? So now, with this idea that the World Economic Forum came up with, well, you will own nothing and you will be happy. This sounds absolutely dystopian. First of all, ownership is the security and safety. It is the ease of mind, the amount of stress that you will be under if you start renting your flat, renting your prescription services. Now we have refrigerators, TVs that you can. We even have like cars on subscription services. Now imagine everything is just subscribed. I heard the other day that even clothing is now on prescription. So now you have prescription services on everything. Can you imagine the amount of stress that you will be under to perform in an environment where your added value, your value within, will be decreasing? The strain it will create, this will be crazy. This will drive people completely into madness. We will destroy so many talents that would have thrived in other way. How many scientists with genius ideas will never make it because they will be broken by the system before they even finish their studies and come up with some new breaking theories, while a small portion of a selected elite will be able to live freely and develop, right? Whether we go even so far that we then say that basically the creation of their offsprings will be genetically modified, I don't want to go that far. It's just that from a agnostic, mystical perspective, I prefer to have a society where we have more resources to us available, where the strain will be less, a society where you really would work less to keep your lifestyle and improve by working more, but then improvement means really significantly improve, where you would have value, or where you could really spend time in developing your own ideas, be it philosophy, if you want to, be it sciences, or spirituality. And I think it will create a more healthy society, because your environment shapes you, especially when you are a child. If you will be born in an environment where everybody struggles just to come by, you will be imprinted prioritizing material means above everything. What it will hurt is, number one, compassion. So you will most likely not be so empathic towards other humans, because you will everything see as a battle of survival. And your mind will be directed towards this direction of improving improving, making it in an environment where all odds are stacked against you. Because the distribution of assets will be so disproportionate that even if you're a genius, even if you're the best skilled, you will not be able to match someone who will have this level at their disposal. Now, historically speaking, and that's something that I honestly need to reflect, this isn't something that is out of ordinary, right? If you look in all the kingdoms, if you look in all the, especially feudal societies, or going to the emperors of the East, there was always this incredible gap between a few selected versus the many, okay? And it's not to say what is right or wrong, but we have the means to improve. It's just that we are now steered into a direction where we are more and more supporting the gap. I mean, the other day somebody showed me the statistics of Lamborghini and said, you know, that Lamborghini in the recent years set more exquisite cars than during the whole history of the company. I wouldn't believe it. Now, this sounds really strange. It really does. But it shows the wealth gap is growing by the day. Like I gave you the example, you inherit 1,000 houses and rent them out. Now imagine you inherit 10,000, 100,000. You cannot even spend the money that you get, and you will just purchase more and more assets. And we will create a very conflicted society. And there are examples where this was driven to the extremes in the past. I mean, French Revolution was one of the answers to this unhinged, disproportionate distribution and sort of behavior, the disconnection with the people. The other really disturbing example is the whole Bolshevik revolution in the Soviets, right? Paid by the gold from Germany to Switzerland, where Lenin resided, and come back, overthrow the government. It was a mess. It killed tens of millions of people. It was just horrible. And then half of 20th century, we actually came together and said, okay, it's time to learn the lessons, right? Let's bring in human rights. Let's start developing. Let's see humanity as something that we want to improve as a whole, not just the elites. And for some time it really, I would say, worked, because if you look globally on the improvement of the living standards and life expectancy across the globe, it was rising. But now we are turning back. We are turning back into this pre-half 20th century status in a very, very dangerous way. And with developing all of these controls mechanisms and destruction mechanisms, with basically private ownership of all communication channels, it's getting in a very, very autocratic and unprecedented way. We are not there yet, but we are almost there. And this is why I see the need to actually create this video, because we still can talk about how we would like to develop, which direction we should go, we would like to go, what would be the sort of, what would be the value of a human in society. How do we see society today? How do we want to see society in future? How will it be shaped? And within all of this is, will we have our spiritual freedoms? Can we express ourselves freely? Can we write? Can we gather freely? Or will we go more and more into the way that to support economic elite, we will turn to a radical religion that will be supporting and legitimizing the economic elites. And they are examples in history and even in recent history where theology took over the religious part of the country by support of the autocratic elites, and they basically have a deal where the theology says everything that is jurisdictional, where the jurisdiction is for the ruler to decide, and the ruler says everything that is religious in the nature is for the priests here to decide. And it will strangle the freedom of spiritual expression, and it will make it very hard to follow the path of the sages. It will even make it really hard to get the materials, because we see how artists and books are getting censored in a way that I never seen before. Because nowadays you can take a book that's online and just change the content. Change the content. The next reader will not even know that it was changed. This is this Orwellian where the lie becomes the truth and the people forget that there was even a truth, right? The technology to perform this, it already exists. We have it right now. It's happening right now with certain authors where they change some of the words and meanings. Now, let me give you a crazy example of censorship on the Metropolis movie that was, it's basically 100 years old. Now, when it released, it was like around 160 minutes. Very long, especially for audience at the time not used to this artistic expressions in cinema and this length and this depth of thought. It was groundbreaking. Now, when it came to the distribution of the movie into the cinemas, the distributors were like, yeah, who will watch so a long movie? And I'm told, I haven't seen the version, but I'm told that the US distribution completely changed the narrative, right? Instead of making the elite class responsible for the misery, they just changed the, because you could, right? It's a movie where there is no speech, so you have these tickets, there is written what's actually happening, so they just rewrite it so that the responsible is the working class. I mean, how crazy is that? It's a censorship that was done 100 years ago. Obviously, this is a German movie, so the director was going completely crazy about it. But you see, this was how they could technologically censor 100 years ago. They had to take every copy. It was a film copy. Cut the film, like manually cut it, insert the frames, and distribute it. Now, distribution for most people is a couple of channels on prescription service. It runs on servers, and you just need to go and change the source file once, and it will be changed all across and everywhere, which is happening now. So the censorship idea is unprecedented. The idea of this technology that we are using, absolutely unprecedented. It can go really into the Orwellian way that we can completely erase or completely change the meaning of artistic expression and spiritual works. I mean, I could go as far back as when Christianity started to form from many Christianities in the first centuries into this orthodoxy, and one of the edicts that was put in place by the Emperor of Rome, 4th century, was actually to burn and destroy the alternative versions, right? So therefore many of those fabulous Gnostic texts or fabulous early Christianity texts have been destroyed. And that's why we, for example, have a difference within the Ethiopian Bible that has the Book of Enoch that is nowhere else, because they just they disagreed on the council and they just disappeared in Africa, and therefore they preserved one of the streams of Christianities at the time. And there are so many examples of censorship by power. But it was mostly the church and the state. Now we are coming into places where there is a couple of technological companies and they basically own absolute majority of distribution. And without any state, without any legal process or due process, they can just change it. Say, yeah, well, we will change it, otherwise it will not be distributed, right? And if you own the majority of the distribution, there's nothing you can do against this power as an author, right? Either you can write and it will never be seen, or you will have to accept their censorship. Needless to say that some of the works that have been changed are changed and the author isn't even alive anymore, right? So this is something that is really, really serious. And you know, like I said in some of the previous videos, right? I was born under Soviet occupation. I remember censorship. You know, I had friends that have been in the dissent, you know, that have been persecuted. They couldn't publish, so they wrote it on their type machines, and then copying the text was incredibly problematic because there wasn't even access to copy machines. So the copies had to be manually retyped and manually distributed in the underground. All of this, I think, will completely disappear. And so having a power that will on one hand own the state and on the other own the religion can bring us back into the dark ages where the church determined what is right or wrong in thinking, whether the earth is the center of the universe and the sun is rotating around it with all the planets and spheres, or whether the sun is the center of the solar system and the planets are spinning around it, right? You could be burned at stake for this. The Inquisition would be after you for just stating it. Nowadays, you don't need to go so far. You just change the sources. You change the narrative with the power of owning the distribution. And although spirituality has always thrived and can always thrive in any social situations everywhere in the world, and we have really seen it, be it from the Far East, as they call it, to the Middle East, as they call it, to Europe, to other places where we had these sages that we know of and those that we certainly don't know of because maybe we haven't even preserved the literature of them. So the point is not that you could eradicate spirituality as it's such, but you can tremendously reduce through radicalism and wealth disproportionate distribution the ability of people to pursue anything but indoctrination, Because if the people will not have the means to survive, really, they cannot be focused on anything. And even thinking will be reduced to survival. Then indoctrination becomes easier and will be the thing that the people will just take in, as sad as this sounds. Therefore, when I see the discussions that are saying, oh, you will nothing, but you will be happy, I need to ask myself, how is happiness defined? I mean, if it's not the self-determination, if it's not to have the necessary means for a decent life, I mean, where do you want to see the happiness then? Obviously, happiness is a product of your heart. Yes, you can be happy even in the most challenging circumstances. And there is even beauty in sadness. Agreed, yes. But to be at that level, to say that the tears are the fertilizer of your heart, like one of the Muslim sages I'm quoting right now. This is an exceptional, extraordinary man who had the ability to be in an environment where he could learn on universities, travel the world, be in discussions with other intellectuals. And that was in time where the strict orthodoxy was not the ruling way of interpretation. How can we expect from the people to be at this level? And therefore, I'm a strong proponent of a more equal society, in a sense that people's dignity needs to be preserved for the purpose of having space and the means to develop everybody's own creativity. I don't believe it as a humanity that we can afford to lose even a single one of these beautiful minds that in conditions of a just society could develop further beautiful ideas, be it scientific, spiritual, or artistic. Yeah, like I said, a beautiful day, a beautiful morning in a forest.